All right, David Ruis. Now, Chad, you've been telling me some stories about this David guy that he's quite a character. Is that true?
Yeah, he was definitely one of the funniest interviews that we had the pleasure of capturing during our '90s Worship Night docuseries production.
Yes.
And I've been chomping at the bit to get him on the '90s Worship podcast because I know
Yes.
that you will very much, Ryan, enjoy getting to talk with him. And
I will.
yeah, and David's just an amazing guy. I mean, written some of the biggest songs of the '90s.
Mm-hmm.
Always been a personal hero of mine.
Yes.
Just what his songs have meant to me. So perfect guest for
I
what we're
love it.
doing.
I can't believe I get to meet all these people because I've never really spoken with David, but I'm so familiar with his music and ministry, and we're both Canadians. I think he's a Canadian. I'm pretty sure, anyways. So
Yeah.
there you go. So go Canada, go! That's what I gotta say. Anyways, the rest of this is unscripted. I've got lots of notes. My hunch is I'm not going to get to any of them because David's going to throw me off. We'll see where this goes. This is 90s Worship Podcast with David Ruis. Here we go. David, I was thinking you might be impressed with our little podcast setup, but then I'm looking at you and you look like you're a true radio host right now. I mean, it's like,
No, I just don't want to be. But
I just don't want to be.
I bow to
don't
you.
know.
I bow to you.
No way. I love the microphone. I've got a microphone like that. I mean, I love singing in something like that from the 60s or 50s or that vibe.
Well, if you can't pull it off, at least you can look good. And I
That's
thought
right.
this looked good.
Oh,
So,
looks awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. It's an honor to get to know you finally. You would never have seen me. I've been in your presence a couple of times. I might tell some stories about that just to find some like point of reference in your life. But hey,
Sure.
First point of reference, let's just have a little Canada talk here. So are you actually living in Canada right now?
I actually am.
All
the
right.
last decade, I've been back on Canadian soil, which, as you know,
Welcome
is my home
back.
turf.
Yes.
So I'm in British Columbia, just outside of Vancouver in Kelowna, British Columbia, just
Yes.
over the mountain pass into the Okanagan Valley. Yep.
I know it well. In fact, I passed through there. I store my boat in Kelowna. So, I mean, I'm just putting that out there. So every time
Dude,
I got to go.
Honestly, just come on over. Like, for real. Put your feet up.
Okay.
Yeah, it'd be great. Come on by anytime.
And my favorite restaurant in the world is Woodfire Bakery. Do you know it?
Oh.
Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah, I do. That's pretty insane on the main drag there on Highway
That's
97.
right.
Yeah, I know Woodfire.
Woodfire Bakery.
There's a lot of crazy stories that we could go down there that I will not uncork for this particular setting.
Okay.
But this deserves a visit and a sit chat in my backyard about various and sundry things, which I'm sure would be pretty interesting.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'm coming to Kelowna in May. It's on my calendar. I'm going to bump up my calendar, and I'm going to text you, and we're going to get together.
Text me.
So
yeah, for real. Like legit.
Absolutely.
Like honestly.
Okay.
All you podcaster listener types out there, sorry to drag you into our little Canadian conversation here.
Yeah. Hey.
But, come along.
Us Canadians.
Well, I'm here in Nashville.
Yes, that's right. Well, Chad and
but y'all are gonna be the 51st state pretty soon, I hear. So
hey. Touching on some sensitive territory there. This is not a politics show, but I will say I'm proud to be a Canadian, standing strong. But we are very nice people, aren't we, David? We're we're very kind, very grateful. So, anyways,
mad.
Yeah, David, like just a couple of points that I can remember. So I remember when you recorded an album. I think it was a live album for Vineyard Worship Canada at the Chandos Pattison Auditorium. It was in Surrey. I don't know if you can even remember this.
Oh, my goodness.
It was like, I think you did Wide, Wide World that night. Yet I Will Praise. I think that one was sung. I don't know, but it was quite impacting.
I remember that.
You do?
Huh.
See these
I
little.
do. I think it was Brian Dirksen had come back into Canada from the UK, had done a couple pretty successful things for Vineyard Worship UK.
Yeah.
And it was the first kind of thing for Vineyard Canada of that nature that we were doing.
Yeah.
I do remember that. I was living in Winnipeg at the time.
Yeah, yeah. But it was like a moment that I was starting to realize, Canada has something to say in this whole worship landscape of the world. And certainly you would represent, you're one of the key worship leaders or leaders of, the worship genre in Canada. So, but I've heard numerous times, and for those, now everybody knows Praise Charts is from Canada too. So, hey, you're outnumbered here, Chad. Sorry, buddy. There is something going on in Canada. Tell me about that. Like, do you believe that? Do you believe that you've got something to say out of your roots, out of your people, out of this nation that we're in?
Well, I think, it's a bit of a mystery as to why.
Yeah.
But I think if you just even take a 30,000-foot view of Canadian culture and impact in the media and entertainment spheres, it's not insignificant. There's been a lot of Canadian presence, in the arts field. And so it's not surprising that would translate, into the church world as well. I don't know if it's because we're just freezing all the time up here and we got to keep warm somehow, or it drives us into a creative space. But it's pretty remarkable, if you do go through just a catalog in various and sundry aspects of the arts, there is a lot of Canadian presence. So it is intriguing. Yeah. I know, particularly in the main sort of publishing and recording space that I've been in historically, in the Vineyard was a significant amount of Canadian writers and people involved. But again, as is pretty Canadian, nobody really knows. There's a proverb that says the lizard finds its way into the king's palaces. So I think the Canadians are the lizards of the worship world. So we make it into spaces. I don't know what it is. It is intriguing though.
Well, how about this? Is as far as what I know of Jesus, he didn't live in some big popular town. He was a massive leader for the generations, but nobody knew where Bethlehem. Bethlehem was like Spuzzum, and nobody knows what Spuzzum is except BC people. But it's an unknown town, right? And so there you go.
Yeah, it could be. Who knows?
Yeah,
I love it.
But even still, we're here to talk about, you and some of the influence that you've had, not only as a songwriter, but also raising up worship leaders, which you're a part of, and the Vineyard worship movement in particular, which seems to have had such a significant space in this formative years in the 90s. That's a lot of what this podcast is about. Could you take us back into the 90s for you? What was shifting in that decade from your vantage point? Tell me about what are some key memories you have.
Yeah, so shifting in regards to the role and place of worship, or things in general, or we'll just see where the conversation goes.
See where I just kind of threw you out an open term. I in general, I feel like something was shifting as we moved from the 80s through to the 2000s. The 90s kind of sits in between there, and it was like this, people were waking up to like, oh my goodness, music is going to impact the church. And so it went from playing guitar in my living room to now I'm like fully produced and spending hundreds of thousands on a track somewhere in between there. So no,
that's a great observation. I think the 80s or the 90s were a pretty significant pivot. You had a couple things perhaps happening. I'm just, I'm not an expert, but
that's all right.
from memory, which is slowly fading, and experience and kind of living through it. I was raised in a particularly fundamentalist kind of conservative space, which there's a lot that I, of course, carry right through. I'll carry right through till the day I die of just really positive and all that. But it tended to be a bit isolationist. I was, trained classically actually in the music sphere. And so because of the church environment that I was growing up in and raised in, I never saw music as something actually that I would see as a long-term thing with a sense of call to ministry. By the end of high school, I kind of felt, maybe this serving in the realm of the church maybe is what my future looks like. So went to seminary and college and that sort of thing, but didn't really see music as an integral part of it. I just didn't want to be a Easter cantata director for the rest of my life. Like there were options. I think even outside of the conservative space, you kind of had an emerging sort of expression within Pentecostalism and the charismatic sphere. But it was still fairly traditional for all intents and purposes. Yeah. You had people like John Wimber and, the Hosanna Integrity folk and stuff kind of coming at things from a various angles stylistically of music, but they were definitely exploring this sort of awakening of understanding. Of course, for those of us that follow Jesus, we certainly see the hand of the Holy Spirit in it, and all of us all mixed in there together.
Yeah.
But exploring, wow, there's something about uncorking a corporate expression of music that has a little more spontaneity, some vibrancy, writing fresh material. I think the thing that the Vineyard in particular introduced into the conversation, at least from a song crafting and theological standpoint, was songs weren't just now to be sung about God. They could actually be sung to God by a bunch of people at the same time, which was pretty revolutionary, which then opened the space for a little bit more of a, I'll use the word casual, like not in a negative sense, not in a demeaning of majesty and presence, but casual in the sense of I can come just as I am. And you know what? We're longing for something that's authentic. Yeah. So I think right across different musical genres, I don't want to pin this in one musical style, but there was a longing for some authenticity in expression. So it was kind of came across like, in fact, the terminology was used, let's be a little more culturally relevant. What I think that means now looking back with the 2020 hindsight, if you will. Yeah. Now it kind of means let's just be the coolest and hippest we can be, which is, there's some positives to that. In my opinion, there's some real landmines there as well. I don't want to just be the old guy, from the 90s that's lobbing grenades, but there's something a little tricky there. But I think it was a little different. Cultural relevance in the 90s meant to just be real. And if it meant I'm singing songs out of a particular musical style, that's because that's who I am. Yeah. There was no CCLI. There was no charts. There was CCLI was just kind of emerging. But with CCLI, you couldn't direct market, for example, to CCLI at that time and get a song into the upper echelons without churches using it. It was definitely a barometer of what was being sung out there in the church world. One of the first worship songs I had published, I remember someone sitting me down in the industry and just going, what we've observed over the last decade plus in this area of Christian music, which was kind of maligned, honestly. The CCM world kind of snuffed their nose at it a little bit. It's kind of like a classical composer sniffing their nose at hymns. It was like a professional musician going, what's this kind of worshipy kind of thing? Yeah. What is that? Again, not negative. It was just the cultural waters we were swimming in. The guy sat me down. He said, what we've observed is it takes about 10 years for a song to find its way into the vocabulary of the worldwide church and start to get sung. Because a lot of it was word of mouth. It was some radio play, which was predominantly the United States, which had its own filtering mechanisms, right, of what was going to be successful, what wasn't, what was going to get listened to, what was going to get played. But there was this a real grassroots groundswell of music just kind of finding its way. And it wasn't blowing in the wind of CD sales even. It wasn't even it was the wind that was carrying it was people experiencing these songs together in various settings. So for me in my Vineyard experience, you tag along with, you might not know these names, but a guy like John Wimber or whoever.
Yes.
He's speaking at something.
Yes.
Worship is becoming such a high value. It's not just a warm up. It's not just, it's not a performance though. So it's kind of creating this weird space in the experiential ecumenical life of the church, and realizing, no, this is really something that could glue us, not just glue us together, but give expression of our hearts, that we might find more unity in the middle of a song than we do trying to figure out some theological premise or something.
Yeah.
And so the songs and the music just became part of these experiences together. But it wasn't a worship concert. It was embedded in an entire, dare I say, more holistic experience of the community of faith coming together. And music was a centerpiece in it, but it wasn't the only thing happening. You're praying for each other. And so it was a very interesting time to incubate creativity, expression. It wasn't even about getting a hit song out there, and I'm not opposed to that, obviously.
No.
It was, let's give expression to our hearts right now. What's happening? What's the Spirit saying? What are we experiencing together? What's the music that would give our hearts, just light our hearts, whether it was in a space of lament or a space of celebration or a space of, it wasn't a means to another end. Maybe let me say it that way. Yeah. I think in the 90s, we began to discover, both theologically and experientially, worship is really an end in itself. And so it was quite remarkable to be writing music in that kind of space. I don't know, you might know this song, whatever. I hate to be self whatever in this thing, but one of the earliest songs I wrote, a song called "You're Worthy of My Praise," which seems to just
very much.
I wrote that I wrote that here in Kelowna, dude. So like in a little Baptist church. We're growing, people are getting saved, but we ran out of songs. Yeah. So I'm just in my basement. I'm not, I'm just going, where did my little daughter, I don't know, she was 2 or 3 years old or something. She just goes, I will worship. And I was like, oh my goodness, like you could repeat this thing, like you could sing. And then someone, and so my little daughter, it was like, it's just like, it legit, there was an innocence. Like there was just we just ran out of songs. Now that's impossible today. And that's a good thing. No, I mean, just the plethora of things that are, Google new worship song today, and it's like, 1,000 hits. Like it's like, so how do you navigate that space? That's a whole other conversation. I know. But I think what was happening in the 90s was there was a longing, a capacity, and some skill set that was starting to emerge in the context right across the denominational spectrum, where artistic and creatives who had some theological chops and space to give vocalization to something were going, wow, maybe we have permission to do this in a way that we never thought that we could, that it even fit. I mean, that would be my sort of experience, right? Like, whoa, hold on. This is more than just like singing. What's happening here? Yeah. So as that gained in sort of notoriety, it got the eyeballs of the CCM world. All of a sudden, you did have people thinking about it as more of a career trajectory outside of the sphere of the local church. I think from the early to mid to late 90s, worship was really embedded in the life of the local community, and that's always been a huge value for me. I mean, not everybody has to do it that way. But I think there was slowly, because of its notoriety, popularity, impact, it's not negative, right? But people were just going, we could sustain something, like even from a business model standpoint, touching this particular genre. Artists were going, oh my goodness, I could actually find perhaps a career here. Again, sincerely just trying to find their way forward. in what their calling in life was and
Yeah.
their service to Christ. But it created a whole world that I think fed off the hunger of the local church to express itself in worship. So if I would have a caution today, that would be the caution. Pump the brakes every once in a while and realize this is to serve. This is to serve the ecclesia. This is to serve the community. You know, are we continue and give authentic expression.
So good.
He's on you.
So many thoughts.
Yeah, I'm sorry, dude. Okay, good. Camera's back. Sorry, am I just?
No, you're blowing my mind. That's what you're doing.
Blood in me, so forgive me
Oh my goodness.
So I'm sorry. Pause me. Stop me. Stop me from myself.
No.
Save me from myself, what, brother?
Yeah, one of the thoughts I am recognizing that, well, you're speaking from a Vineyard context. The things that you're talking about actually were happening beyond just Vineyards, like Integrity, Maranatha.
I'm trying to say that.
Keith
I fully
Green.
agree. Yeah, this is what was happening everywhere.
Yeah, it was definitely a movement going on all around, and that would be the first thing I would think. And the next thing, because you keep apologizing for, like, you're not being negative about, you know, what we're in the positive, but the reality is whatever was happening in the 90s was responding to something that maybe was lacking otherwise, or that needed to grow. And that exists in every era. So here we are in 2025, and we still need leaders to go, well, what's happening today, and how can we respond to that? So there was no way of stopping the ship. When you get the music in motion, it was gonna take off like a 747 and become a massive machine. And it's not just Christian music. I mean, Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift, I mean, all these folks have, you know, Spotify and Apple Music has transformed how we receive music. But now we need to look at it with new lenses and go, well, what does the church need now? You were part of looking at what the church needed in the 90s, and now we got to say, and I think, you know, what Chad and I are doing, even with this little podcast, is we're trying to look back and even ask the question of how can we maybe at least honor and know the roots out of which this worship era kind of came out of, and hopefully in some ways to actually go back to some of those places and go, oh yeah, maybe there's something to get back to in that. Chad and I were just chatting with Mike Coleman, president of Integrity Music. I mean, you're probably familiar with him, and you know, he was just reminding us about that kind of that image of, you could have the artist on stage, and then you've got the congregation as the audience, and then the prompters in the side. It's kind of like a Greek method versus the congregation actually being on the stage, you know, and that kind of idea of where is the center, who is performing for who here, who is the audience, and I think that perhaps what you were a part of in those 90s was, as you've been talking about Vineyard songs, singing to God, is recognizing God's our audience, right?
Sure.
It's like, and
if I may, I think an antidote to some of that stuff is valuing and celebrating the local church, the small, valuing, celebrating ministry in the margins, singing with and to people who could care less, you know, how many CDs you've sold, and they just need something in their belly, you know, and you come along with this beautiful fusion of worship and justice that, in my opinion, you know, brings just a wonderful fragrance to the Lord. So it's kind of like, you know, kind of regaining the question for every era and every generation, is God listening? Yeah. That's a pretty important question, because if worship's for God, it's pretty important if he's listening. Yeah. So you can have a hit song, maybe God's not listening to it. You know, I mean, that sounds a little over the top, but not if you go to some of the biblical text, right? So it's kind of interesting. I don't know if can I just share a quick little story?
Yeah, please.
That really was recalibrating for me again. Here I live in Cologne. I'm not part of a very big church here, but I'm traveling all over. And one thing I love to do is just facilitate worship and prayer on a Tuesday night. just get together in a little Lutheran church here and just sing. And I'm all set up. This a couple months ago, and there's nobody there. I've got kind of stuff happening, and we don't do a big band or anything like that anyway. But then the thought struck me, oh, you love to talk about the audience of one, don't you? Like, what if it actually is it's easy to talk about that in a stadium of 80,000 people. Like, do you really believe this? Or kind of, I was like, oh man, I'm kind of, so I sit down, and some people come in, and I didn't realize, but right in front of me rolls in a dear friend. He's in a wheelchair. He's had a condition his whole life, that has him in that condition. His, emotional age and all that's not very, but there he is. And then there's another guy, really cool guy, Brian, Down syndrome dude, who I just love hanging out with. And the two of them are just they're just worshiping their faces off. And I look up, and for me, the way my relationship with God, everyone's got a different way of, tapping into this stuff. But I just felt the Lord say, isn't this enough for you, David? Like, isn't this enough? This is it. Like, why wouldn't this be enough? And I'm not, again, it's not opposed to all the other, but I just busted. Yeah. I mean, and these guys, they don't know what's happening inside of me. They're all crying. And then, I might get in trouble for this, but an old Gungor song, Brian looks up, he goes, David, let's sing beautiful things.
Oh, I love that.
And so
song.
The three of us are just bellowing out of our guts, you make beautiful things. And all of a sudden, worship now makes sense again, right? Like, because it's anchored to life. It's in the real, and that doesn't take away from those incredible moments when we gather with a pile of different people and the incredible stuff that happens, united around Christ. But just that simplicity, just that, I think that's at the heart of what Coleman was saying. It's like that's so good. That's the juice right there.
Yeah. I have a memory myself similar to what you're experiencing, where I was asked to lead worship at a conference. Had the whole band all together. The conference took a break at the end of the night to, before we were going to come back to worship. Nobody came back. The place was empty. And I'm telling you, we decided, screw it. Yep. I'm sorry, I didn't say that. Beep. We decided we're going to just go for it.
In Canada.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. We just decided we were just going to go for it. And it still is one of my life worship moment memories. We just let it out.
Love it.
And we're like, who cares? There were people peering in the doors going, are they rehearsing, or why are they singing? Nobody's here. Nobody cares.
Yeah, good for you, man. That's cool.
So anyways, okay, I have a question I want to say, because you're not just, like, I know you don't just play simple songs on acoustic guitar. You're a bit of a box breaking kind of musician yourself. I mean, I can remember, for example, that song you wrote, Wide Wide World, or something like that. The first time I heard that, my head was like, is this even a song? Like, so you weren't just doing simple songs. You were trying to, like, I don't know, ruffle the feathers a bit, or stir up the leaves. There's something in you. I've seen you speak as well, and you're not one of those, like, soft, simple, let's just have an intimate moment. You're like, you create an atmosphere. I have memories of you shaking up a room in a significant way. So what's going on inside of you? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, the dark side of that is, you don't want to just stir stuff up for the sake of stirring stuff up. So, having a solid wife that can speak into some of those artistic edges, having the safety of community around you. But having said all of that, honestly, I think it just comes down to authenticity. And it might sound a little strange, but everything that I would explore, let's say in a setting that you would find yourself in, had already been explored in my living room or in our local church or in a, when we lived in Winnipeg, which is a city right in the center of Canada, freezing cold. We were down in in the, what would be kind of reference point, the inner city, a lot of, just collision of the poor with the suburb, with, all of that. We would, just do Saturday night gatherings and sort of the younger crowd would just kind of keep coming. And it's out of that seedbed that a song like Wide, Wide World came out of. We were exploring kind of before it was kind of the thing to do, acid music loops and just kind of writing out of that space. And, we'd do worship gatherings till 1 or 2 in the morning in an old beat up abandoned United Church in the heart of Winnipeg with this massive dome ceiling and just lights flashing on it stuff. And for me, what the difference in that context was any of the musical I'm looking for the word there, just the musical trappings, any of the lighting, any of that kind of stuff was all to accentuate the message that was being. It wasn't to highlight the artist. I don't know if that makes sense. So, like, I'm all for all the bells and whistles and the whole bit, like you're describing. I love exploring to the very edges of even the tech space and various things. Yeah. But is it authentic? Is that becoming a tool and an avenue to express the heart of something, which to me is art, right? Yeah. It's like God, the artist, Romans 1, everything. Creation is about the invisible becoming visible. Or you have Jesus, describing himself in the book of Revelation as the source of everything created. So it's like the wellspring of everything that we see in creation. And it's from the heart of an artist and a creative being that Jesus then says, you know what? Stuff that's lukewarm, it's got no taste. Be hot or cold, which of course I think we know has nothing to do with the temperature of the water. There were hot springs in that area that people would travel for thousands of miles to soak in. And Laodicea was one of the primary cold water sources for a lot of the cities around that area. So what lukewarm was it's just, it's empty. It's bland. And so Jesus is saying, as the source of creation, I'm just assessing this as pretty lukewarm. Like, what's wrong with you? So to make this quicker, this is all important to me, though. So this is why that stuff happens, that you're describing. So you come back then to John, the famous John 4, Spirit and truth. Spirit is the pneuma, the pneumos, the something that is crippled and even some would say dead inside of me, that's been awakened by Christ. That's where worship comes from. If I'm tapping it, it'll impact every other part of who I am as a human being. But the source of my worship is the pneumos, the spirit in me that's been made alive. But then Jesus very quickly couples that with truth, which is not proskunuo in this context. It's not a worship that this isn't about intimacy or anything, nor is it truth that's about the mind. It's about honesty. The word for truth there means nothing hidden, completely open, no secrets. And so you have this incredible invitation of Christ to engage with the Father in true worship, which is saturated in honesty and integrity and comes from the place of the Spirit. Philippians 3, another indicator, another compass setter theologically for us worship people. So Paul is saying, just like a human body, you said the other word, so I can say, but pardon my French here, as clear as on a human body circumcision is, that marks and set asides a person as dedicated to God. He said, what are the marks on a true Christian? The true circumcision. The very first thing he says is worship that's led by the Spirit.
Yeah.
And the word for worship there, again, is not proskunuo. It's not individual worship. It's corporate worship. It's the word used in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint. It's the word used for temple worship. So those that come together and worship God, led by the Spirit, from pneumos and from honesty and integrity, that's now you got something that the very ear of God himself is bending down and listening to, and it awakens something in our world, that glorifies God. And it's just amazing to think that we're part of that. So, and I'll try, you get permission, there's certain contexts, even at that time, I'm in, and I know I'm in a context where, just do 2 or 3 hymns. That's going to be the best thing to serve this community right now. Right. There's other settings that you're in where you go, I can be a bit of a maybe groundbreaker. Yeah. I might not get invited back, but they told me I could try. Yes. So,
yes.
And it's like, and it's also not just the music. There was one time, actually, I think it was back on Canadian soil at the University of Waterloo. It was one of the early worship together things. And I didn't know the rules now because the rules changed, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like what I said, the innocence of just coming together. We're worshiping, we're teaching, we're everything. People maybe paid a registration, but they paid a registration for a whole package of things. They had some teaching material. You had a binder, with a bunch of stuff in it. You weren't there for the word. Well, this was a worship thing. And I honestly, I'm just confessing, I was innocent. I was innocent in this one. I didn't know. But people bought tickets to come see the worship leaders. That was a whole new experience for me.
Yeah.
So we get into this auditorium at the University of Waterloo. There's a few thousand people there, 2,000 to 3,000 students. And it was the space, the air was just jacked, man. It was like, you could just feel all these expectations and all this stuff. And I'm just sitting there and I'm just going, wow, this is like, what's happening right now? And I knew there was a whole bunch of other people that were going to be leading worship. So we played a little bit, got about halfway through a song, and I got off. I don't know if I should be putting this out in a public podcast, but I got off and I just sat on the edge of the stage. I said, hey, how's everybody doing? What's going on here? And places, kind of murmuring. And I said, we're here to worship, right? And it was kind of like, yeah. And I just talked about worship. And I said, it's going to be lots of other people going to be doing stuff. And why don't we just think about this? Like, why don't we just carry this in prayer? Let's go have just go have a cup of coffee and just kind of think about this a bit. And then, we can come back. And that was it. That was my worship set. And, full confession, it's not against anybody. I got in so much trouble, man. I was like, people have paid money to come and see you and to hear you sing. And they gave me 4 songs in a row. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I don't understand these rules of engagement. Like, I don't get it. Like, help me get this. So I began to learn what kinds of spaces I was in as well. So I'm only telling you a story to tell you, I don't want to just stir it up for the sake of stirring it up.
No.
Like, legit, it's for God and it's for the people.
Yeah.
But it's a bit of a journey, right? To navigate this stuff. And I think, that's some of what I don't want to see get lost, whatever's happening and I'm excited about so much stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if we can't pump the brakes and bring it down to that, because I would have loved to have been an entertainer, man. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I still do. When I lived in Los Angeles, I lived there for about 11 years, and I had a sort of a side gig. Dr. Schlavin was my DJ handle. I got Zebra Docs from Frankfurt, and I could spin tunes and just do DJing and stuff in a couple party contexts and some wedding settings and stuff. And people knew that's what I was doing. And because I love Jesus, that's going to bleed all over everything. Mm-hmm. But I didn't intentionally ask the people to come to worship. Like, 90% of the people coming in there don't think they're coming to a worship thing, and they shouldn't think they are. Can worship happen there? Yes, 100%. But there's something about the deliberate purpose is to get people in this room to worship the living God, I don't know. It's not better, worse. It certainly isn't sacred and secular. I'm not a dichotomist that way, theologically or experientially, but it's different. You're carrying something different. So learn where you are, be present where you are, and know how you're serving in that space. But now I'm preaching a little bit, so that's
I love it.
Stories, but
I
think that was the ethos of the 90s, and like you say, it was everywhere. People were just hungering for something authentic.
Yeah, it was. If I think of you, and I mean this with all due respect, but even just from the stories you're sharing, is like you're kind of a messy guy. Like you're gonna say something inappropriate, or you're gonna do something that you weren't supposed to do. But it's actually quite refreshing to hear you look back and tell these stories. And I feel like we just need more people like that in our world, who are like, okay, yeah, I'm sorry I said that, or I'm sorry I didn't do what was expected. But this is how we don't fall into ruts as humanity, as we have people like yourself. And I know I've only brushed by you a couple of times in my life, but now it's sort of like, it makes sense. I can see how you were in that way. And clearly we needed that. And so wow, good stories. Thank you so much for sharing. Chad, do you have any thoughts as to, like, I mean, you found this guy. Where'd you get this guy? What's your thoughts about this?
Well, David is a legend. I think it would be fun, because I know, Ryan, you had this on the notes, but I don't want to spoil these, and I don't know which one that David would want to tell, but David, you got some hilarious stories around the song he wrote, Every Move I Make, so I'd love to hear one of those if we have time.
Yeah, that's one we all know. Let's hear that a little bit.
What's the hilarious ones? I don't know. I must have said
something well, you told me one off record that I will not repeat. You had a really funny one about, like, how that instrument hook, kind of got started, but like the song originally was kind of like had this African thing going on. Yeah. So just a really great global kind of story.
Yeah.
Sure, that's back to that's back maybe to like sort of the messiness of the 90s, if you will, from an industry standpoint, whatever. So I'm in so Every Move I Make. I'm in South Africa. I've gone. Actually, I just had a WhatsApp back and forth with a guy named Trevor, who was just has just become a brilliant friend. He was just a incredible architect behind the scenes in apartheid coming down. Just a incredible South African philosopher, theologian, author. Anyway, he was living right in the heart of Soweto at that time, which was open now. Apartheid had just kind of crashed. So you can imagine the dynamics, but Soweto, pretty gnarly space. So as part of a conference, that was not in that space, and probably not a lot of Black African representation or colored, which is not a derogatory term in South Africa, in the conference. So there would have been some representation there. So I was just like, Trevor, dude, like, I just got to meet, this is real South Africa, but I need to meet other aspects of real South Africa, if that makes sense. That's been always a thing that's driven me too, is like, I want to be present where I am. I want to be writing from who I'm with. I could do this, and I do. I've written for television. I've done various things. I know how to craft something emotive that will move somebody for a particular scene, or will, But there's something for me different about worship. Something that comes from a different place, spirit and truth. So anyway, long story short, we end up doing a kind of a worship night in this beat up gymnasium in Stellenbosch. I think it's just outside of Johannesburg, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. And it's just this old beat up gym. Dust. I'm like coughing just with the dust. People are stomping. There's a bunch of just phenomenal Zulu people. And they got these big sticks, and they're just stomping, and they're just doing the whole thing. And I'm in the middle of this whole swirl, and this this idea is just coming to my head. So I grab I just met him a year and a half ago again, an old guy named Cliff, a very well-known Kwela guitar player in South Africa there, and just a Christian guy. And he was playing with me. I'm like, Cliff, like, come over here. I'm going, can you hear this? You know, and I said, I'm just hearing this. Na, 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 na. And it's like, so the original incubator of that song never got recorded. I'm desperate to re-record it out of this ethos, which I think I'm actually pretty close to doing. I've written now some much more African-based beats and some Kwela riffs, like for the bass line and stuff, that it's still the same song. Like, it's totally recognizable, but it just has a totally different feel. So I start crafting this song. We do it in the conference, and it just explodes. And then the song just started going everywhere, and then got published, and then, you know, kind of found its way, particularly amongst children, which I find incredibly encouraging. Like, if you can awaken children, I think it was the theme song of Daily Vacation Bible School one year. Like it's insane. There's a major artist, because it's a public podcast, I won't say, they were on a tour bus one day, and a friend of mine was in the band, and he's like, maybe that's one of the stories you're talking about. He calls me up, he goes, okay, you're never gonna believe what's happening in the bus right now. You know, so and so is leading the entire tour bus in every move I make right now, with all the actions and everything, because she learned it going to Bible camp as like a kid. Yeah. And I was a pretty well-known artist. It's just fun stuff, right? Like this stuff, and that's way outside of CCLI charts and conscience and stuff. All that stuff's wonderful, but a song that can find but I think it's because of its authenticity. So it gets back onto American soil and kind of got sanitized somewhat for American radio play and various things, like, people aren't really going to buy like sort of more of a South African sounding kind of thing, unless if you're Paul Simon, you know, just release Graceland or something. So it was sort of like, it's not going to fit in the book. You know, we had the bookstores back then, you know, and all that kind of stuff that was influencing everything too, obviously. But I feel like I'm talking like about 1,000 miles a minute.
Was it like, I gotta tell you this.
Like, it's so fun. It's just like,
I drove my kids. I had 4 kids. 4, 3, 2, 1. We drove from Vancouver to Ottawa in 2001, and that's a song that we were playing in the van. Every move I make, I'm making. Oh yeah, me and my kids, we loved it. Come on. So, was it Sonic Flood who Americanized that song? Did Sonic Flood record it? Or I've got in my brain, I can hear like power guitars.
You know, I think it was David Crowder, when he was just hitting the scene. He's the one that kind of did it. Sonic Flood ended up doing You're Worthy and stuff like that. Yeah. We've become very good friends with, you know, Jason Halbert and all that. It was at the beginning of all that stuff, which is another just incredible story of coming out of authenticity. And then it just exploded into the space of the industry in a way that on one hand was unexpected and good, and on another hand just changed all the dynamics of everything, right? So,
Well, you know,
wild.
I mean, for Americans, there's nothing wrong with Americanizing a song. It's just, hopefully in Africa, they sing it like Africans, right? And Sweden.
And I think this is the beauty of the time we're in now. I think that it's been present enough. There is a lot more elasticity, like across the you know, sort of the musical space to do different things, but it was a pretty narrow funnel, you know, in the 90s and even early 2000s.
It was until you came along. It was until you came along, and then the funnel got bigger. So that's what I see anyways.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Okay, well, let's take it full circle. So we're going to meet in Kelowna at Woodfire Bakery. Continue the conversation.
No, you're coming to my house, man.
Okay.
To my house.
I like it.
Woodfire, but you're coming to my house, dude.
Okay. Or I'll go to Kelowna. I'll go to Woodfire Bakery. But then I will be full when I get to your house, so that doesn't work either. But whatever.
Well, we'll start there and we'll end here.
Okay. Sounds good. We'll make time for it. And
and David, I got to get you over to the U.S., so we'll work on that for something. That
you're in Nashville, right?
Fun, so.
Nashville.
Yeah, I'm in Nashville, but we're doing stuff.
I actually am talking to a few people about coming and just opening the space. My concept is have one night where it's just stripped down, just a piano and myself and maybe one other person, and we just uncork a whole night of worship, and then a second night where it's got more bells and whistles and stuff, and just kind of, again, hold those spaces like in a beautiful tension. That's like, you can do it this way, but you don't need all that as well. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but I want to do that in Nashville. So help me pull it off, brother.
Okay.
I will. Well, let's stay connected on that. So
yeah,
we'd love to help.
Yeah, dude, I'm talking to a couple people. I was just with someone from Nashville last weekend. So
okay. Well, people, if you are listening in here, stuff is happening. Stuff is getting organized right now. There's meetings going on in Kelowna and Nashville stemming out of this podcast. But anyways, thank you for the good stories. It's good to know you. Good to meet you. Thank you for your heart. Thanks for stirring up the pot a little bit. We need that. God help us. We need that. So I feel encouraged and inspired. That's what we're all about. In the 90s podcast. Chad, another good one. Down in the books.
Appreciate
Thank you very much.
Thanks for doing this.
Appreciate you
Thanks
too.
for curating this. Amazing.
Right on. Signing off. Here we go. See you then.